I've had a note on my toaster for about 3 years now that I just scribbled one day that says, I will be stronger. And I'm absolutely living that. I am stronger having gone through all of this. I'll be 74 in another couple of weeks. I mean, giving up is not an option. I just don't. I know what I want, and I know there's a way to do it.
What if I told you that after 2 incredibly hard years with long COVID, my guest today, almost 74 years old, is now riding her bike 140 miles a week and planning a 12-hour championship race this fall? Just wow. As she puts it, long COVID didn't break me, it made me. If you're new here, I'm Raelan Agle, and this is where we dive into real, raw, unfiltered stories from people who've turned the seemingly impossible into the possible and left behind their chronic conditions forever. After interviewing over 230 people here and counting, one thing definitely shines through. Healing isn't about going back to your old self. It's always about becoming who you were meant to be. My guest today, Dustyn, is a national level cyclist, retired teacher, a graphic artist, and she is joining me from Valley Springs, California. After getting long COVID, she spent months housebound, couldn't walk to the kitchen, couldn't handle the sound of all the noises outside, too dizzy to eat, too foggy to think. But deep down, she still believed that she'd make it through and refused to give up. And not only did she get her strength and stamina back, she's got herself a whole new life. She's such an inspiration and a reminder that it is never too late to start living fully again. I'm sure she'd love for you to drop a hello in the comments, so please join me in welcoming Dusty. Dusty, amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me, Raelan. It's really been quite a journey, and I appreciate being able to share that with people. It's an honor to be asked. It's hopeful that sharing it helps other people see that they will get well.
Yeah, the progress you've made and where you are now is so incredible. I am ridiculously excited to hear the journey that got you to where you are today. But before we go back, what does life look like for you right now?
Right now, I have opportunity in front of me to do what I want. And what I want is to be able to race my bike again, or at the on a lower level, if I don't race again, I want to be able to go ride my bike with my friends. And for me, that means riding anywhere between 50 and 100 miles with my friends and to be able to ride 4 times a week. It's my norm. And I also want the rest of my pieces of my life back, which is as an artist, painting and doing murals and just enjoying what life really has to offer now.
Yeah. And you are riding and you are enjoying.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And comfortably. And 4 days a week. I don't ride 60 miles 4 days a week, but over the period of a week of four rides, I am riding maybe 150 miles. That's pretty close to what I would consider training mode. And that's huge, considering I was told a lot of things over this last 3 years of how that wasn't a reasonable goal.
Yeah.
And I settled to say, okay, then at the minimum, I want to be able to go ride with my friends. That's my world. And friend rides are generally between 40 to 60 miles. So it's still a big goal. And, people would roll their eyes. And I'm like, I just don't have to listen to them all, I guess.
So what happened for you? Take us back a few years, because things weren't always how they are now. You used to be in a very different place. So tell us about your journey with this.
Well, and COVID came along and everything was shut down. And so the racing was kind of put on hold for a while. The events were canceled. And so it was a good time to get in extra training and just be ready for when things opened up. And in 2022, things were going well. And I showed up for a 200-mile race and was checking in at the hotel. And that night was waking up coughing and sick. And as that day progressed, I was really happy I got into the event with a rest day earlier. So there I was saying, well, I'm really coughing and hacking. Good thing I got here early because I can rest tomorrow and then I'll be fine the next day to go ride 200 miles. And I look back at that like, wow, wow, that's a little strange. It was, I took the COVID test and got whatever the drugs were at the time, Paxlovid. And creeped home, driving home on the farm roads, barfing and coughing every time I needed to stop. And so I was sick at that point. Once I got home, I was sick in bed, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks, and sicker than any flu or anything I'd ever had. And I knew from other race friends to be very cautious about coming back into the writing. So I was extra cautious and took things extra slow, and managed to be able to start writing again maybe in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And so I thought I was being extremely cautious, and I wrote for maybe 2 months, and then it all went. And that was, I remember being on a ride thinking, oh, thank goodness I'm going to be fine. I don't have any lung issues. That was the big, look out for that. And I remember thinking, okay, I've succeeded. And about maybe a month later, it just all fell apart, and severely so. And I ended up with pulmonary testing and all that stuff. And, I was using, medications and nebulizers and the percussion vest to knock out that, I called it sticky snot. I mean, it just wouldn't go away. And I was sick. I was back being sick and in bed for probably another 6 weeks, maybe. I mean, I could kind of creep around the house a little, but I live alone. And so I just kind of was able to shut everything down and get well. And so I was able to kind of make my way back, and I started writing again. And maybe, I don't know, 2 months later, it all fell apart again. And I knew nothing about the cyclic nature of recovery. And I just, that one, when I fell apart, was pretty severe. I was extremely dizzy for about 10 days, and I was having heart palpitations, and the dizziness was extreme. And I had needles in my head, the sense of needles in my head, and headaches and stomach and all those things. And I ended up in the ER with 2 back-to-back visits in 2 days. And they were checking to make sure I hadn't had a stroke, because I'd had the dizziness so severe that I was having like convulsions. And so of just arriving at the ER was scary for the second time in a row. And I remember being so extremely tired. I wanted them to admit me so that they could fix it and I could get well. And I'm laying there still really dizzy after, all day in the ER and all the scans and all that. And I'm thinking, I want to be admitted to get well. And yet that's crazy, because you can't get any rest in a hospital. It's not a very restful environment. But I didn't know what else to come up with. And so the doctor is signing me off, signing papers, and he's getting ready to release me. And I just looked at him and said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, everything looks normal. And I said, well, why do I still feel like so dizzy I can't sit up? And he's writing down, he's not looking at me, he's writing down, and he said, well, I would put it as a diagnosis of vertigo. And I'm thinking, well, I told you that when I came in, I was dizzy. So it didn't, it was very clinical. And anyway, I was released and had a friend come get me, and I ended up in bed back at home for quite some time again. And that's when things were really actually at the worst, because then you start trying to look through Facebook and see if anybody has any input. And then the pulmonary lab, I was still going up there to do basic walking on their treadmill, and I was they were quite concerned because the blood pressure and all that was like crazy just walking on a treadmill. And the lab tech, knew me. I had taught her kids, and I was a teacher before I retired up here. I was a PE teacher, so she knew how active I was. And she said, you're going to just need to cut back. You may not be riding your bike again, certainly not anytime soon. And basically, she was right at that point. So it gave me time to think, because I couldn't even move about the house. I mean, I was still dizzy enough that I'm like leaning on the wall to get down to the kitchen and that kind of thing. And I had a friend who said, maybe I can help. And she did, I think it's called cranial work, where it's a lot of manipulation on the skull, and then it's attaching to points along the body. And I don't know how to describe it very well, but she was a friend, and she just said, maybe I can help, and I'll do anything. So I didn't know what it was, but at and the driving an hour to get there, a couple weeks or months down the road, that drive was incredibly tough. But I was there. I was committed to being there. The next morning I woke up and I could breathe. I could expand my lungs I told her, I said, I feel like I still have sticky snot all over my rib cage. I can't, blah, blah, blah. So she did whatever her trade is. And the next morning I was quite pleasantly surprised. I could feel my rib cage expand. And that's when I realized that the inflammation seemed to be a huge issue. That's all I could kind of grab a hold of. And then you start looking on Facebook, and then there were a few support groups. And that was very helpful for a while, except that both the support groups I was in, one of which was called Long COVID for Endurance Athletes. And I'm like, okay, this is magical. Mm-hmm. And it was helpful in some respects because at least there was people. But people would share the medical information, like documents that you could look at. And I'm like, okay, that's not working because I don't have any brain power. It's pages worth of and I'm like, scroll down to the bottom. I can't deal with this. And between that and the fact that the moderator of the group was medically injured through her COVID process and was not going to make gains in that area, it was some heart issues. The tone of the page was, you need to be very careful because if you screw this up, you're going to end up in a dark room, closed in. It's going to be much worse than it is now. And so I didn't want to believe it, but I was still very afraid to expand. And that period of being, and I remember as much as I love the outdoors, that period after having thought I was kind of recovering became much more difficult. And I remember looking out the slider of the bedroom out into the world that I love being outdoors in so much and shaking my head because I couldn't understand why I didn't want to be able to at least sit outside. I couldn't do bright lights. I couldn't do sound. I couldn't do music. I couldn't do anything. It's like every sensory thing was crash-like. And so it was very isolating. And I have no idea what I was even eating enough or anything, none of that stuff. So the gal who was doing the cranial treatments, she was helpful in helping me. I said, since the medical system keeps saying, we don't know what to do with long COVID, or everything looks good, you've got some lung scarring, but it's manageable, you'll have COPD for the rest of your life, you need these inhalers. It's kind of like, okay, that was it. There was nothing beyond that. I realized, okay, I need to take this into my own hands. It's likely that holistic is going to be the answer for me. And so the friend was very helpful in being able to at least help me look at the site I was looking at to see if it was going to be useful or was it just going to be another, stop in the road that was going to not go anywhere. That step helped me greatly. The appointments were 2 hours away. So the first appointment, a good retired friend showed up and said, hey, I'll take you there. He hung out there for 4 hours on that first appointment. It was exhausting, but I made very steady progress through that because I was finally rid of lifelong stomach issues. I'd always had a squirrely stomach. I'd seen nutritionists. I'd worked with 2 nutritionists and I'd worked with 2 different gastroenterologists over the years, and there was nothing wrong. And yet my stomach was always squirrely. I just had to shrug and say, I guess that's, some people have that. And within 2 weeks of working with a very good holistic center, that was gone and it has never come back. So that program with some therapies and some supplements worked very well for me. I was working very much with them for about a year and had started writing again. Things looked pretty good. It would kind of fall apart, but not with any severity. It would be maybe 6 weeks of writing well and feeling human again, but not really on a socially manageable level or a comfort zone in anything but being back on my bike. And the brain fog was still there.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Dustyn. So this program was helping a bit. It wasn't getting you fully there. What were some of the main components of the program? Like, what were you doing?
They did some red light therapies, and there was another one that was PEMF, I guess, like electromagnetic waves or something like that.
Okay.
And I ended up getting a mat for that I now sleep on, that I've had now for the last couple of years. It's, it's supposed to be helpful, and there's, a lot of research on PEMF. So I kind of went with that. The supplements were very helpful. A big piece of it was no sugar, no dairy, no peanuts, no whatever the group of things are that tomatoes is in. It's kind of a high acidic or something. And that was kind of shocking because I loved peanut butter, and I loved a coffee drink that has milk in it, a frappe or whatever those are, lattes. And I'm thinking, well, now you just took away two of my main food groups. Now what? Well, almond butter is fine, and it's the same thing. It took me a while to make the taste change. And there are several dairy-free milk products on the market. I alternate kind of between oat milk and almond milk. And so those things were extremely helpful. And then the supplements helped. I mean, there were still some issues that were weak in my body, weak links. So, and I started reducing the trips out there because it's, a 4-hour round trip to be there for the therapy. So I now order the supplements that seem to be the most useful, from him, and they ship out and that sort of thing. They were supportive. They were helpful. I made quite a bit of progress, and I could have stayed simply with that, but things didn't seem quite right. I was still dealing with brain fog. I was still confused. I was still uncomfortable in the world. Things didn't feel right. It didn't feel complete. And I wasn't happy. Even though I was riding, I had very big headaches from rides. And I tried to tell myself, well, that's just, maybe I rode a little bit too far. And I think I just made the mistake of prioritizing my comfort zone so strongly that I didn't allow myself to believe the things that might be standing in the way of it. And I didn't prioritize getting rid of the brain fog. My whole life, I grew up, I know for the last several decades, I thought it was completely normal to have the feeling of electricity in my arms when I'm driving to anywhere. If I'm driving along the road, it's like, oh yeah, that just means I'm really like ready to go. And now I can look back and say, no, that really means your body is like overly wired. And I finally realized the term wired and tired was quite descriptive. So, and I realized finally that I was still seemingly responding to the hypervigilance mode that I had been in as a caregiver for my husband, because he had been critically injured and I had been his caregiver for a couple of decades. And even though he had passed away about 5 years prior to when I got COVID, I felt the effects of being on hypervigilance continuing, and I didn't realize it. So that's where I was at the point of which I had enough energy to look a little harder to try to find a better answer. Because I was convinced, since the doctors kept saying, we don't know what to do with long COVID, that I need to find somebody who did know what to do with long COVID. And your tests are all normal, which is huge. Not everybody gets a clean slate. So they said there's scarring on your lung, but it's not a lot. And something in your lab results indicate COPD. And I'm like, I don't like the sound of that too much. But then they just said, well, mild asthma, here's 2 inhalers, a maintenance inhaler and the albuterol. And I thought, I can live with that. And so that's where things were up until the last 4 months, I think. Yeah. I could have resigned myself to living like a retired old lady, because at that point I was no longer dizzy. I could drive and run my local errands. I couldn't really expand a lot if I was going to I live in a rural area. So if I was going to drive to a town, like the big grocery store, that would be about a 60-mile round trip. And that would be exhausting. That would be the only thing I would do that day. And I don't know, maybe people in their 70s might want to give up there, but I just thought I'm not giving up. If I can get this well, I can get the rest. So that's where that was at that point,
So,
which was earlier this year.
so clearly you found something that got you from there to here. So how did you
Yeah.
go about doing that? And what did you
So
do?
what I did at that point was, um, and even prior to that, leading up to it, I was on Facebook trying to find the answer to why I still felt, I guess, so stressed out or so wired, I guess, unable to sleep. I hadn't slept well in quite some time, like years, probably a decade or more. So because long COVID hit so many people, Facebook was full of gadgets. And so suddenly I'm looking at information that says this and that will treat what's the word I'm looking for? uh, the boom and crash. I mean, I'm looking for the right phrase because sometimes brain fog's still there.
Like the post-exertional malaise or the push and crash?
And partly the rest and digest and the fight or flight modes. Okay. And I mean, everybody's heard of fight or flight, but whatever. It's kind of like, okay, I guess that doesn't apply. I don't know how to use that information. So these Facebook ads with these various devices start explaining that a little, and then you look a little further. So many of those things helped a fair amount. Things that treat fight or flight, like deep breathing or tapping or a PEMF mode of a certain wavelength, those things will treat you and help you feel better. They helped me feel better for while I was doing them, or like the tapping and the deep breathing, that would help. And then I could unwind a little bit, but it came right back because it didn't address the issue. It didn't address the cause. And at some point, I saw some of these interviews of people who had made it out of severity of long COVID. And I started pursuing both your channel and Miguel's channel and on YouTube. And that was unfamiliar to me because it took quite a while to even want to watch anything on YouTube. I couldn't handle the motion or the talking, especially if they're talking about a topic that lasts 20 or 30 minutes. I couldn't follow that still. So although I was physically able to do things like take care of myself, there was a huge missing link. I mean, I couldn't digest information. So the more I watched that, I had run across handfuls of things along those lines, and seeing the success stories was kind of clicking because there were other people in my same boat saying, I can do the things I want to do now. And I'm like, investigate a little. And at some point in January of this year, I'm skimming along. I spent, I don't know how many hours a day on Facebook, and looking at other information, shrugging as in, I don't have any capacity to do anything else. I mean, you can scroll and just be not there and hopefully, connect with your friends. I mean, the isolation was immense. We'd already had 2 years during during the early COVID time of not seeing and interacting. And then I had about a year where I could see my people again. And then I went down for another, at this point, it's been almost 3 years. So about a 2-year block of not really any human interaction. I mean, I've got neighbors that you chat with over the fence now and then, and that was it. So I saw a free trial for Miguel Batista's program. And at that point, I had been trying anything and everything. If something's going to be a free trial, I'm trying it. And anything you get on Amazon, it's basically a free item because you can return it if it doesn't work. There was many things that just give it a shot. I will spend the money and give it a try because I don't have any other options if I want to live happy again. So I looked at his free program, and it was a 7-day trial. And I thought I've got nothing to lose. And I signed up, and then I got on the site, and my brain ability capacity was so limited that I couldn't even navigate the site. I couldn't find the things, and there were many choices listed across the top of the page. And I'm like, they were done in a paler ink so that they're not like blasting out at you. And I'm squinting and trying to find things. It's an enormously useful site, but I had trouble right from the beginning of being able to like handle it. And I thought, keep digging at this because it can't be that complicated and it looks pretty promising. So I looked at the videos that are right there in the beginning of that. Everything is lined up beautifully to jump in and use, and it's all kind of in order. And he does short video clips that finally explain the vagus nerve and the central nervous system and the fight or flight along with the freeze, which I'd never heard. All of that is described in easy to digest bites that you can handle that I could handle during brain fog. Mm-hmm. And it started to click. And it was a 7-day free trial. And I'm like, okay, you got to make sure, like with anything else I was trying, you got to make sure and put it on your calendar. So if you don't like it, you don't end up being committed, right? And I'm like, in 3 days, I'm already signing up for the monthly program that I wanted to go on. And it was a huge relief that he had programs at different levels based on what you think you need. So you can do it all on your own for something like 100 or so a month. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to try to digest all this information without any human interaction. So the one I chose with him, you have all selections of live calls, and they're well spaced out, and you can watch them if you don't have any, if you have too much brain fog to like watch them and interact with people, you can watch them on replays. And he had, I don't know, tons of replays lined up, not just the ones that happened from the time you joined. You could watch ones from a year ago. You could watch success stories. I would fall asleep at night with the success stories. So it was just a beautiful opportunity to try and understand more. And it was presented in bite-sized chunks with extremely friendly and empathetic coaches, all of who've had either long COVID or CFS. And I just was able to jump back into a level of understanding and a level of what my nervous system was all about and how it had been protecting me my entire life without me even, I mean, I didn't know. And suddenly I could understand things of why it was interacting, why the nervous system was stopping me from moving forward and how to deal. It's been amazing. And and the fear is gone. I don't have fear when I notch things up a little anymore. I don't have fear of going back and being so worse that I'm going to end up in a dark room and unable to interact anymore. To me, that's unfounded. Unless there's a medical issue. I mean, I guess that's what happened to the person who was saying it. But there's a lot of long COVID out there that have, their scans are good. And so why aren't they okay? And I think many of them are people who are living, for whatever reason, at the top end of, beyond the capacity of what their nervous system can handle. And our society kind of puts us in that mode. I mean, you generally graduate college or graduate high school or whichever, and then you do your job. And if you want to rise up the ladder and be successful and have the family and pay the bills, you grind yourself. It's very easy to grind yourself into feeling like you're on for 24/7 and not getting enough sleep. So
as you go through the program, so understanding that nervous system component and, okay, my fight or flight's on and there's all these different things. So then what? Like, what do you do with that information on a given Tuesday? Like, what does doing recovery what did that look like for
program is talking to your nervous system and celebrating even the smallest wins. So instead of being frustrated at the things I wasn't able to do, which usually were things like, say, desk work, like balancing the check, when the statement comes in and you're dealing with the statement. Early on, the brain fog was so severe that when the bank statements would show up in the mail, I would put it on my desk and I was like, later, I'll just do it later. When the brain fog finally lifted enough to actually, one of them showed up, I thought, maybe I better balance the checkbook kind of thing. There were 9 months worth of statements sitting there on the desk. And I'm like, that was a reality check for me, because once I put it on the desk, it wasn't, on my task list anymore. And that made it real as to how intense the brain fog was. And so and that was probably a year before seeing the program I'm in now. but it was a reality check. And the program is helping me to understand how to expand without being fearful, and how to it's like, yeah, you still kind of do it carefully, but in a positive way, not in a fear-based way. The nervous system, the brain fog, and those other symptoms were there to stop me from doing what I wasn't really ready physically to do yet, which now makes sense because so early on, I can tell I was writing when I probably shouldn't have been writing yet because I still had trouble going to the grocery store. And since that wasn't a priority, I didn't really care. So there I am physically extending myself and just getting the endorphins from doing that without realizing, because I couldn't think clearly, the impact that had on the capacity to get stronger in, say, social or cognitive ways. And his lessons in the videos, in the modules, are lined up in a way that you go through them and it starts to make sense. It's hard for me to describe because I still don't necessarily have the cognitive capacity to line things up and make sense of information sometimes, but it's the presentation is there, that things are in order and they're in bite-sized chunks, and he does simple charts. So, and that works for me. I'm visual, so it's easy for me to see what he's talking about when he just sets it up on one of his easy to read charts, and I can understand it better, which means then I trust it more. And then it makes it easier to walk it through, I think, just the trust process. And the live calls are golden. We share the wins at the beginning of the call, which when you say it out loud, that I was able to go to the grocery store today, or I was able to cook a meal, or whatever the thing might be, it sounds small until you say it out loud in a group of people who know exactly what that means. And it helps cement it to me, and it helps cement it to everybody that's watching that day. And when you celebrate that, you realize if I can make a meal, I can do more, and I will be doing more when I'm ready. We also learn gratitude in the calls, because when you're grateful for being able to cook your first meal, you realize the level of gratitude. And I'd always had that when I was, as a caregiver, I was grateful for whatever progress my husband could make and for whatever medical issue wasn't as bad as it could have been. So, gratitude has just always been a piece of me, and a positive attitude has always been a piece of me. And I've always believed I would heal. And I've had a note on my toaster for about 3 years now that I just scribbled one day that says, I will be stronger. And I'm absolutely living that. I am stronger having gone through all of this. So yeah. You just do a lot of assessment. It's like, in the beginning, it's like, I'm not going to let COVID break me. I'm just not. And then last month, I remember thinking, COVID didn't break me. COVID made me. COVID made me a chance to step back and do it better. So it's been, and it continues to be, an enormously interesting journey and a much needed journey. And if I hadn't broken from COVID or been backed down from COVID, I would have just gotten mono again or something. I had mono 3 times in my 50s and 60s. And I didn't listen. I could have changed things back then and done it differently. And the doctor would say, well, this is a more mild case of mono. So, give it 6 weeks or so and you'll be good to go. And he was right, except for that it finally was too much. So at the brain set that I had with it. Yeah. And I think my being has settled. And I've come to the realization that my nervous system, and we abbreviate it NS so that it doesn't have to be written out every time we use it on the site. I call it NZ or NS. And I talk to my nervous system. My nervous system is my best friend. She's been taking care of me my entire life. And I can look back into early childhood and realize that she has been protecting me in the ways that were needed from early on. And I am just incredibly grateful that this mass of human cells running all over the place, of guts and blood and all the things that organs, is capable of letting me stand up and be alive every day and doing what I love. And that we get to choose what we do And so if I had wanted to settle for being sedentary, I could have chosen that, but that's not who I am. And my nervous system worked with me so that I could do what I love to do. And I'm back, doing creative paintings again. I have just recently started volunteering with one of our children's advocacy centers to work with the kids and do some murals. And it's this wide open sense of being in the world instead of doing what I love because it's the only thing I'm comfortable doing. It's amazing. It's an amazing process. And it's because I learned what the nervous system is about. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I've interviewed quite a few people who have talked about either Miguel's program or his videos have been really helpful on their journey. I know he's been through it himself. I've interviewed him here. He's a great guy and he's doing incredible work. I'll make sure, of course, for people watching, listening, all of his links and information will be listed in the video description. So if you want to see his incredible channel or check out his program, all of that information is there. Dusty, this is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to link up here for as well because so many people that I talk to that become unwell later in life or they had a condition for decades, they reach a point where they do feel like maybe it is too late for me. So I have a playlist all of people fully recovering later in life. So it never is too late. I'm so glad you didn't give up. And I hope people watching.
Well, and I'm 74. I'll be 74 in another couple of weeks. I mean, giving up is not an option. I just don't. I know what I want and I know there's a way to do it. And many times along the way, it's never too late to be who you might have been. And it's, and now it's been rephrased. As somebody in the academy said, it's never too late to be who you were going to be in the first place. It's kind of like not who I might have been, but who I was destined to be. It's never too late. My key was things were so dark at the point where I had the 2 ER visits that when it was dumped on me to get well, I have an aunt who lived to be 100. So I had another 25 years in front of me, and I was not going to live it in that small, dark space of limited to being in my house. It took me forever just to walk to the end of my driveway to get the mail. And I was not going to stop with that and be limited by that. There had to be a way. And I found what that was. Yeah.
Thank you for being here today, Dusty. I just love hearing your story. I know it's going to mean a lot to a lot of people. I appreciate you putting yourself out there and just sharing what's worked for you. This is incredible.
Thank you so much for having me.
And yeah, thank you to those of you watching and hope to see you in one of these videos in the Later in Life Recovery playlist.